And so again, welcome. We are here as the Spiritual Guidance Training Institute. I am Jeanette Lundy, and this is...
And I'm Jeanette Banashak.
Yeah, we are the co-founders and co-directors. SGTI, for those of you that don't know, and our website is spiritualguidancetraining.com, is an organization that was founded in 2017 for the purpose of training spiritual directors, companions, we call them guides, with an interfaith, interspiritual focus. And we have with us today a wonderful interfaith, interspiritual, even though you may not call yourself interspiritual, Jamal, we feel your interspiritual heart, especially your Sufi heart, which is definitely
I'll accept that.
interspiritual. And Imam Jamal Rahman. I hope I said that somewhat okay. And we're so thrilled that he's here. Jeanette's going to do a little bit of an intro, and then we're going to launch in with some questions. The topic is creating the beloved community, which is such an important topic for us today. So thank you, Jamal, for being with us.
All right. Well, I'll give a little bit of a brief introduction of who our very special and revered guest is, and then we'll start off with the question and see how the conversation unfolds. Imam Jamal Rahman is co-founder and Muslim Sufi minister at Interfaith Community Sanctuary and adjunct faculty at Seattle University. He's a former co-host of Interfaith Talk Radio and travels nationally and internationally, presenting at retreats and workshops. Most recently, Interfaith Community Sanctuary took the second place prize in World Interfaith Harmony Week, sponsored by the Parliament of the World's Religions. And we're very excited about that. I participated in the one in Chicago.
Oh.
Since 9/11, Jamal has been collaborating with Rabbi Ted Falcon and Pastor Don McKenzie. Affectionately known as the Interfaith Amigos, they tour the country sharing the message of spiritual inclusivity. Along with the Amigos, he has been featured in the New York Times, CBS News, BBC, and various NPR programs. Jamal is the author of Sacred Laughter of the Sufis, Awakening the Soul, with the Mullah's comic teaching stories and other Islamic wisdom, Spiritual Gems of Islam, Insights and Practices from the Quran, Hadith, Rumi, and Muslim teaching stories to enlighten the heart and mind. The Fragrance of Faith, The Enlightened Heart of Islam, and co-author of Finding Peace Through Spiritual Practice, The Interfaith Amigos Guide to Personal, Social, and Environmental Healing, Religion Gone Astray, What We Found at the Heart of Interfaith, Out of Darkness into Light, Spiritual Guidance in the Quran with reflections from Jewish and Christian sources, and Getting to the Heart of Interfaith, the eye-opening, hope-filled friendship of a pastor, a rabbi, and an imam. Amazing.
Those are long titles, and I just want to, for my defense, say those are all supplied by the publishers, not by us, for marketing purposes.
That's great. That's great. You know, it's hard because, you know, in the pauses with colons, I don't know if people are thinking this is a list of like 25 books or 8. Originally from Bangladesh, Jamal has an abiding faith in the power of heart-to-heart connections to encompass differences and dissolve prejudices. He enjoys programs that celebrate life and unity through delight, laughter, and food. He has a private spiritual counseling practice serving individuals and couples and is available for interfaith weddings and ceremonies. Jamal offers a variety of classes and workshops, including the popular Blush of the Beloved, a course in spiritual deepening and discernment, drawing upon the practices, insights, and wisdom within Sufism, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Taoism. He's a popular speaker on Islam, Sufi spirituality, and interfaith relations. There is so much more. that we could say we are grateful for this opportunity to be in discussion with you, and would love to start out the conversation with one question. And Jan, when we were waiting in the waiting room, used this term about what is enlivening the folks that are coming onto these webinars. And so I wondered if we could start with a question about the present. And that is, what is enlivening you now, especially in light of this is being recorded during some very difficult moments internationally as well as nationally?
You know, during these times, I feel what has been a primary joyous feature is that there is a grassroots movement at the level of ordinary folks like myself who really want to get involved. And I think that is the key. That is what excites me. That's number one. Number two, I think there's a growing realization that if we really want to solve at a core level, at a structural level, our problems of social justice issues, environmental problems, the core level is we have to do the spiritual practice of overcoming our prejudices, expanding our awareness, our compassion, what we call the inconvenient inner work. We just have to do that. I think there's a growing realization about that. And lastly, I would say the other realization is we simply have to interact with one another. Black and white, rich and poor, Republican, Democrat. Unless we truly connect on a human level, we'll not be able to create the beloved community.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so which brings us to this whole idea of beloved community, the longing of many of our hearts. What would you like us to know about that? You know, how do we begin? You talk about interfaith, you talk about human to human, heart to heart, make those good connections. What else?
You know, if I have to, for example, focus on my work, which is interfaith dialogue. So the question is asked, of course, we realize it is critical. In fact, Hans Kung, that very famous Swiss theologian, he said, it's not just a question of being nice and hospitable. It's really a matter of our survival, if you really want to survive. So there are some stages in interfaith dialogue. Is it okay if I just go through the stages? Yeah. So the first stage is the critical need to connect on a human level. So let me just summarize that by saying that wonderful idiom that this universe is made out of stories, not atoms. Can we start by just sharing our joys and sorrows? I'm talking about interfaith dialogue. The second stage is, let's have some religious or spiritual literacy. I, as a Muslim, it is my duty in this majority Christian country to know something about Christianity, to have an appreciative understanding of Christianity. That's the second stage. The third stage is, let us acknowledge that every religion, every holy book has truths and untruths. The revelations might be divine. Human mind is less than divine. When the human mind touches a divine verse, the understanding can be less than divine. The fourth stage, if you have done those three stages, is we reach a space where we're able to talk about more difficult issues. Areas where our religions go astray, not in your religion, my own religion. The fifth stage, if you've done those four stages, is maybe we realize that every single religion is simply a path to a shared universal. And the last stage is to realize something we have talked about, that it is critical, whether you have a religion or don't have a religion, to do some practices where we become more complete human beings, more Christ-like, Buddha-like, Elohim-like, Allah-like. Those are the 6 stages.
You know, I'm interested in thank you for outlining those 6 stages. The way that you were explaining it sounded like one goes into the next, And one of the things that I have personally benefited from the work that you have online and that you're sharing with the world internationally are the practices.
Yes.
Number 6, doing the practices. And you have such a magnificent way of empowering us to do them, to be activated to do them, to believe in ourselves, to grow in our capacity to love and be loved and receive love, to offer love. And so, I noticed that that's the 6th stage. And so that's curious to me. That's
Yes.
just one thing that I have picked up on the different podcasts that I've listened from you.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, so actually, I think that is the key. That is the core. Unless we do that inner inconvenient work of awakening to our divine spark, we'll never at a structural level begin to have a lasting impact on social justice issues, on earth care. There's a wonderful organization in Japan called the Fuji Declaration. For years, there's been a collection of what is called change makers or shift makers, Nobel laureate winners, former prime ministers, atheists, agnostics, professors, all kinds of people, religious, non-religious, getting together and really wondering, what is it we can do to really, at a structural level, solve these phenomenal global problems? So after much dialogue, through their own experience, their wisdom, they came up with the Fuji Declaration. But what I wanted to point out is the very first sentence of the Fuji Declaration, and these are by people who are religious, not religious, scientists, atheists, agnostic. They're saying that the most important work is to awaken to the divine spark which exists in every single human being and to live by its light in every aspect of our life. So I find that very fascinating that after all these discussions by people of different belief systems, different experiences, they've come up with that major discovery that is the real work, besides all the other important work we have to do. So yes, those practices, whether you call them religious or spiritual or psychological, they are the key.
Mm. Yeah. And Jamal, you also guide a lot of people individually. I'm thinking of our students who are on the line, on the call with us today too, that, in these times, you are working with organizations, you're working in your community of Seattle as well, we assume. And how do you also, if we can use the word minister, hold presence one-on-one with individuals? How is that feeling today for you in light of everything that's happening and your deep desire to continue this interfaith dialogue? How do you transfer this one-on-one to the people that you companion?
When somebody comes for companionship or the work of healing, I immediately want to know, what is their belief system? What are the right words to use that really would splash in their hearts, not in mine? I mean, I would love to hear stories about Rumi and focus on God, but I've had clients who come and tell me, I really want to do this companionship. I really want to do the work of healing, but please never mention the word God. So I have to take that into account. What is the place they're coming from? And then from that vocabulary, from their belief system, I can offer some guidance. I can learn from them. But I wanted to share one important point. I sometimes get clients who say, as I mentioned earlier, I want to do this work with you, particularly of healing, but please never mention the word God. I don't, of course. But what amazes me is when these people, wonderful people, they, through their own work, through their hard labor, to their awareness, to their compassion, they do this work of healing and becoming more complete. These same people become the most ardent devotees of God. It's almost like I write about it. When I see them coming, I sometimes want to turn away because they talk so much about God. It reminds me of that Sufi song, that says, oh God, save me from all these God lovers. There's a beautiful story, a Sufi story of a Bedouin who was asked, do you believe in God? Do you have faith in God? And he said, you mean the God who sent me illnesses, afflictions, poverty, made me wander from country to country to country. But as he spoke, he entered into a state of ecstasy. That's the great mystery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we have a question from Barbara already, if we can ask that.
Yeah, yes.
Because you are a Sufi minister, what does Sufism uniquely bring to this conversation? Mm-hmm. Especially for those of us who are not Sufis, you know, what could we learn?
Yes. Maybe I should first explain what Sufism is, because there's a big misunderstanding. People think that it's a denomination within Islam. So, for example, in Christianity, you have Catholics, you have Protestants, two main denominations. In Islam, we have Sunnis and Shia. 85% of Muslims in the Islamic world are Sunnis, 15% are Shia. Sufism is not a denomination. Sufism is just a heartfelt aspiration to live the spirit of the tradition. So a Sufi can be a Sunni or a Shia, but who says, I don't want to get enmeshed in all those theological beliefs or the fights about them, the disputes about them. I just want to live the experience of Islam, which really means you submit to God, you surrender to God. But what are you surrendering? You're surrendering your attachment to your ego. So I would say what Sufis bring to the table, regardless of what the other's religion is, that we have to do this inner work of surrendering to God our attachment to our ego. And that's one half of our work, I believe, on this planet. The other half is to be of service to God's creation.
So I think observationally, that's the third time you've mentioned how important it is for us to do the inner work. It just always comes back to that, right? You talk about the beloved community. You talk about interfaith dialogue. You talk about one-on-one with people. You're talking a fourth time, talking about within understanding the dynamics of Sufism. Here we are again. The inner work, connecting with that deep spark of the divine within us and transforming our relationship with the ego. It's as if that really is the core.
It really is. And that's something which, I and my colleagues always emphasize, because there's something we want to avoid and denied. I'd rather take course after course, earn degree after degree to teach you how to do the inner inconvenient work. But the key is, I have to do it myself. Like Sufis say, well, Jamal, you're such an open-minded person. You visit so many different temples, the Hindu temple, the Christian temple, the Sikh temple. When will you ever enter the temple of your own soul? That's very critical. Jamal, you read many, many books. That's beautiful. But when are you going to read the book that is your own book, the book of your life, of your story? And that is something we tend to avoid because it's uncomfortable. It's inconvenient. Like, Rumi says, metaphorically he says, you've got to polish your heart. But then he says, Jamal, if you get irritated by every rub, how will the mirror of your heart ever be polished? So for that, spiritual companionship really helps to encourage one another to continue with this work of polishing the heart so that the face of Allah can be reflected in it.
That relates to another question that came up around, is this journaling that you're talking about, meditation, facing our shadows? What is the work?
It's a good question in the sense that if I go back to a Sufi training, there is no uniform work. which is what is beautiful about Sufi training. The teacher or the spiritual companion or whoever it is, in Sufism we say the master, the teacher, will really try to understand the needs of the student and tailor that spiritual work to meet those needs. So for me, it could be that I've got to spend one whole month in just doing breathing exercises. For another one, to really understand the meaning of compassion and practice compassion. For another one, it could be just go and dance in the streets. So every focus is tailor-made. Every spiritual curriculum is tailor-made to the needs of the other. But if I have to summarize, I would say it is really about, especially in these unusual times, it is about self-awareness with compassion for oneself to overcome my biases, my prejudices, my stereotyping of the other. And also it's my work of expanding my awareness and deepening my compassion. That's the inner inconvenient work. But of course, it can be broken up into 100 different practices.
Mm-hmm.
But really, and I'm keeping on going because it's so vast a question. It is really about becoming what Sufis call insan-e-kamil, becoming a more perfected human being. Rumi says, marry your soul. That wedding is the way. So for me, in practical spirituality, it means, Jamal, can you align your personality? And what is my personality? Nothing more than a bundle of conditioned reactions to life's circumstances. Sadly, I think that's the real me. That's just my personality, my life story. So can I align the elements of my personality with my soul? A lot of exertion, a lot of practices, but every minute, every hour, every day, align the elements of my personality more and more with my higher self, with my divine spark. It's a very personal journey. And if I have friends along the way from whom I can learn, because we're teachers and students alike, it makes the journey so much more joyous and fruitful.
Are you finding in these days that despite the fact that every master or student is walking a unique path together, and the guide, the teacher, the companion, the master is listening deeply as to what the person needs, do you find in these times, is there a practice or a couple of practices that are really essential for, as you say, a self-awareness and compassion? What do you find yourself guiding people through into?
I find the main work eternally has been, and certainly in these times, is really to get to know oneself and to connect with oneself. Which means, for example, the Prophet Muhammad was asked, what is the work we have to do? And he said, know thyself, and you shall know thy sustainer. If you want to really know the real you, get to know yourself. And he also said, die before you die. Die to all that is false within you before you die a physical death. And the third thing the Quran emphasizes is repeated again and again, open for me my heart. Open my heart. There are hundreds of ways to open up the heart. So what is my unique way to open the heart? So essentially, I would say it is about getting to know myself, to connect with myself, to open my heart. And then I would add one more thing critical in these times is to get to know the other on a human level, to share 3 cups of tea. Listen, respect, connect. So I would say my package is do the work of getting to know yourself. And then also simultaneously make an effort to get to know the other who is outside your tribe. And one feeds the other. One grows the other.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that.
When you do trainings around the interfaith dialogue process that you explained, I'm wondering for future current participators in this webinar, if they want to do that kind of work, do you have any instruction, any advice? How do you teach it, and is there role play that's involved, and what might be some barriers to, or what are some of the difficult points? What are the more difficult steps for people as you've taught the process?
Yes, of course, the main work for this interfaith dialogue is we'll get them into groups of 2s and 3s, and then we'll ask them to select from a stack of cards, any one of the cards, and those stacks of cards only have personal questions. Like, for example, was there a time in your life you forgave someone, or were forgiven by someone? How did it feel? Okay, so that person takes the card, has a few moments to reflect, and then talks to the 2 or 3 people who are in that group. And then the others are really listening. Why they're listening? Because they're told from before that the next person who speaks will be answering a different question taken from that stack of cards. So when they take the stack of cards, it's a different question. Like, was there a time in your life you were discriminated? How did it feel? Or something you want to share about your religion. Something about your life. You don't have to be experts about your religion or your culture or your politics. So here we are really deepening the art of connecting on a human level and doing it through authentic listening. That we find is the key in this interfaith work. We're not listening to the other. Like, if you're speaking, I'm already in my mind thinking and formulating my answer. I'm not doing the work that Rumi says, Jamal, your job, when Sister Jeanette is speaking, your job metaphorically is to put your head on the person's chest and just sink into the answer. So we really want to, in interfaith dialogue, truly inculcate that practice and the value of listening. An enemy is someone whose story I have not listened to. And then, of course, along with that is, I would say, like you emphasized earlier, lots of spiritual practices. What does it mean to be compassionate? And particularly in our work, what does it mean to be compassionate with yourself? What does it mean to be compassionate with the other? So all these are combined in this particular, you might say, webinar or the classes that we share. What is the difficulty? Well, the spiritual practices are the difficulty. It's inconvenient. One can be enthusiastic initially, then they give up, which is why the work you're doing, spiritual companionship, spiritual guidance, to do it in a companionship modality is very powerful, very, very powerful.
Yeah. So is this, I'm wanting to clarify for our viewers and listeners, this practice of interfaith dialogue, is that something that the Interfaith Amigos do? Is it something that you do? How can we get involved in that if we're interested?
Good question. Normally, we are so busy doing presentations. We invite people to attend those presentations where we offer workshops on this. I personally do a lot of classes myself, which talks about this, but particularly I focus on those spiritual practices. And then I also focus on, what does it mean to connect with the other? What does it mean to make a differentiation between behavior and being? I might be against that person's behavior, but I'm not against that person's being. And I must take the right action. But as I take the right action, can I keep this discernment between behavior and being in my heart and mind? Because this has the power to shift heaven and earth. So we talk a lot about that. We do a lot of practices about that. Mm-hmm. So yeah, a lot of classes we share, all of us, meaning myself. Ted does that also.
Okay. Good, thank you.
Thank you.
I am wondering about the ways that we can today continue to be of service. Will you say again what the Rumi quote was about putting your head on the chest
yes.
of the other person?
Metaphorically, it says, put your head on the person's chest and just sink into the answer.
Okay, and sink into the answer. Yeah. So you talk about that the deep and profound need to really listen to one another and to be present to one another in these times, and that's a form of service.
Yes, yes.
And yet, are there other ways today? Are there more ways today to be of service? You know, sometimes people, they think that's just not enough, you know? I mean, even Jeanette and I have run into this over the years, and someone says, what, you just listen to people? That's all you do? You just listen as a spiritual guide or companion? Well, it's more like what you were sharing here from Rumi's perspective. It is a practice of listening and waiting and being receptive, and inviting the divine presence into the conversation to heal and to guide. And for some, there's an inclination to be able to do that. There's a natural talent. Some people are naturally good listeners. Sometimes they have to be trained. But I'm also wondering what other ways that if you're not an all-out activist and you are not going to be marching, or you're not going to be on the front lines of, you're not an extrovert change maker, you are maybe someone who's taking a different approach. What are some other ways that someone can be of service today?
Yes. First, if I may just make one more comment about the listening part, how critical it is because if I'm really listening, and as we said earlier, an enemy is someone whose story I have not listened to. It could be just a member of my family I'm estranged from. I don't have to go that far to find somebody out, right out there who's adversarial in my own family, in my own extended family. But if I really listen, then I will take the right action. And that is what is critical. This is what creates peace and harmony in the family, the extended family, the society, the community, where we take the right action. It's not just a reaction based on anger. It's not revenge. It's a response. So the listening part is very critical, I find. But in terms of doing other things, there's a wonderful verse in the Quran where Allah says, God is beautiful and God loves those who do what is beautiful. This inspired Rumi to utter this wonderful poetry. He said, let the beauty you love be what you do. There are hundreds of ways to kneel and kiss the ground. That's gone around quite a bit, this particular one. There are hundreds of ways to kneel, let the beauty you love be what you do. There are hundreds of ways to kneel and kiss the ground. So for example, what is our great need today? As an example, earth. I mean, the need is urgent and desperate. What can we do to heal the loss of biodiversity, climate change, ecosystem collapse? Of course, I must do everything to reduce my carbon footprint. So what else can we do? Like you were saying, well, in our community, let's do three things just on this particular topic. Number one, please, every day, put planet Mother Earth in your heart and ask for forgiveness. Ask for forgiveness. Along the same vein, as often as you can remember, any tree, any stone, any animal, any flower you meet, from your heart, send out light and love. Just send out light and love. So somebody said, big deal, asking for forgiveness. I said, no. I said, well, listen to me. I get a lot of people who have been abused for therapy. And I know that even if just one person tells that person, please forgive me, it is so healing. So that work is really, really, it's prayerful, but it really works a great deal. Number two, what else can I do to join the people who are actively involved? For example, we have joined organizations to plant trees. I can join. There's so many different groups doing so many wonderful work. Just join them, earth care wise. So we plant trees. Thirdly, most important, the only way we can really structurally overcome this desecration of Mother Earth is to develop a love and a reverence for nature. So number 3, we say, let's all of us spend more time in nature. And then let's learn from nature. Because the Sufis say, the most holy of manuscripts, the most sacred of holy books is nature. You want to, like I talk about diversity. Rumi says, just look at a tree, meditate on a tree. The branches of the tree, they sway differently in the wind, but they're all connected at the roots. I might feel my religion is better than yours. I'm suffering from exclusivity crisis. The great masters say, look at this metaphor of nature. All the rivers, they flow into the ocean. Jamal, you might be following one river, but please don't mistake the river for the ocean. So that nature teaches me. Rumi says, look at a blade of grass to learn about unconditional love. His poetry is, grass agrees to die and rise up again so we can receive a little of the animal's enthusiasm. So anyway, those are different ways, in our own way, we can be of service to others. And lastly, I want to quote a saying by Prophet Muhammad, who talked about this. He said, do good deeds according to your capacity. God never tires of giving rewards unless you tire of doing good deeds. The good deeds most loved by God are the ones you do regularly, no matter how small they are. A smile, a lending hand, when put together, they add up a huge act of service. I gave you a long answer to a short question.
No, I love that. I think it's a wonderful answer. It's comforting, and it's also hopeful, as we talked about as we began this conversation. That there doesn't have to be self-judgment or criticism that we're not doing enough when we can be doing enough, even by the simple, regular, consistent things. I appreciate your focus on good deeds according to your capacity. And yet I also know some of us can amp up our capacity a little bit too. We can step out maybe, when times become even more challenging. We can take the risk to step out and do a bit more. What would be the next thing that would stretch me, especially if I'm being dominated by my ego with fear.
Yes.
How do I use that as part of my inner journey, my inner process, so I invite myself perhaps to do more or to take more of a stand.
And just that inner work, even if I have that fear, if I do the inner work of honoring that feeling, making sacred that feeling. I mean, there's a lot of practices called sacred holding, just being with my fear, hold it with love and compassion, and just be with that, not run away from it. That inner work by myself, if I do, that fear becomes transformed into, you might say, a greater mindfulness, greater awareness. My anger becomes transformed into a greater enthusiasm. If I just do that service of being with that feeling, like Carl Jung said, would you have the courage and the grace for once just to kiss the demons and dragons within you? That is how they turn into a prince or princess. And if I just do that work, it'll be of incredible service to others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's a beautiful perspective. And I love the idea of sacred holding as well. So many strong emotions today. So many things that are moving through our minds and our hearts. The practice of holding all of the difficult feelings, all of the difficult thoughts and worries and concerns that we have, to hold those in a sacred manner.
Yes. And that is how you become a more complete human being. The Sufis say it's not just about embracing your joys, also embrace your sorrows. These feelings are sacred. They're begging to be, as Carl Jung said, to be kissed. Don't run towards difficult feelings, just don't run away from them. Mm. And then if I embrace that, I evolve, I mature into a more complete, more developed human being.
We do have a question from one of the participants.
Yes.
And it's a difficult question, because we are bumping up against, and maybe even companioning, people or friends who believe very, very differently than we do in these times. And though we might be doing the practices that you're talking about, and we're doing the deeper listening, and we are taking to heart the many things that you talked about today, if we have a friend who isn't in that place. And so Barbara is asking, I'm having a hard time hearing a friend who just wants Republicans to die. How do I hold that? How do I sink into their words and where they are, and maintain the friendship? Obviously, yeah.
So you mean this is someone, for example, someone who's telling me that he or she wants all Republicans to die. I mean, it's very drastic about that. How do I deal with that person? For me, what is very important is just to listen to what that person is saying, and really to listen to their story. And if I become more aware of the story and I'm really listening, it really brings about a change in the other. That's one thing. The other thing is, rather than focus on Republicans and Democrats, I would just share practices of the majesty, of the beauty, of the power of compassion, of mercy, of gentleness. So I tell people, like you mentioned, who are difficult, I say, let's just do the real work. Doesn't matter what your belief system is, what your religion is. And what is the real work? Well, let us practice and understand the divine attribute of mercy and compassion. And Sufis always, they start with that because they say, this is the key. This is the most important divine attribute. See, because in the history of Islam, Prophet Muhammad was asked, how do you find contentment, fulfillment in life? He said two things: have compassion on yourself and have compassion on others. So to everybody who's difficult, I say, first I listen to them, then let's do some spiritual practices. And I want to explain to them the beauty, the power, the majesty of compassion. And like in other traditions, they use the metaphor of water. There's nothing as soft and yielding as water is, becoming the hardest, nothing as powerful as water. And then wherever water falls, life flourishes. Meaning the person who is gentle, compassionate, merciful, is possessed of raw, authentic strength. And number two, that divine attribute is really life-bestowing, life-affirming. So I don't want to just shut out the other person. I want to listen, and then together we share some practices, and in the process, a lot of changes, they happen. See, I've known, for example, when after 9/11, I've known some Christians who were very anti-Islamic. I would say they were allergic to Islam. So how do I deal with that? With that, I do my best to connect with them on a human level. So I would, with this person, want to meet some people who are Republicans and connect with them on a human level, because once I connected with these two people who were anti-Islamic on a human level, they lost their allergy about Islam. But I connected on a human level. But more important, I changed. I thought I was so progressive. I was so open-minded. And I realized after I connected with these conservative, right-wing Christians, that there is so much of sweetness in their community, that some of them are so dedicated to social justice issues, that my understanding of those right-wing Christians, they changed. So the third thing I would do is somehow together, me and that Republican-hating friend, together we meet some Republicans and connect with them on a human level and start the dialogue. It's a long process.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that.
And there's no easy answer to that.
You reminded me of what Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams, Buddhist teacher, says. She talks about being a progressive person, and we can be progressive about all sorts of ideas, but it's not necessarily always translated internally. You know, the progress internally.
Yes, absolutely. You know, Noam Chomsky says that, if you don't listen to those who you despise, if you don't listen to those whom you despise, you don't really believe in freedom of speech. And that is so true. So I sometimes in the past, I have forced myself to listen, because if I really believe in freedom of speech, if I believe in the spiritual value of listening, I have to listen to everyone, including this person who is so anti-Republican or anti-Democrat or anti-gay or anti-Muslim. I need to listen. What is their story? I have to listen to the police, to their fears, and to all the others, black and white. I've faced racial discrimination in a very small way, nothing compared to what my African brothers and sisters are going through. But I know that when I've listened and connected, we have both changed. In fact, in my experience in America, some of my best friends have been, best friends meaning the ones who really helped me, were the ones who are the most racially biased. But somehow they liked me because we connected on a human level. It was very paradoxical, and that opened my eyes that, my goodness, go beyond the superficial bias a human being has. Connect with that person. And that's the hardest thing to do, by the way. It requires humility, it requires patience, it requires persistence, but it's got to be done.
Resmaa Menakem discusses the need to grow in our humility and in our stamina to have the difficult conversations around race.
Right, yes. And to be vulnerable. All of us to be vulnerable. I am from South Asia. I can say things like, oh yes, Black Lives Matter, it's terrible what the police are doing. They're brutal. There's so much of discrimination in this society. But in my own culture, as a brown man in South Asia, we discriminate between different shades of brown. What right do I have to speak so loudly unless I also take care of my own cultural biases?
I keep thinking about my privilege of being white, especially right now in our country. And I wonder for anybody else who's participating in this as well, who are really wanting to participate in dismantling structural racism. And a lot of this conversation is about doing your work, being gentle when I realize that I was wrong, asking forgiveness, but that's doing my own work. And I love your practices, and I'm wondering if you have any advice around a practice or practices that really get to privilege and working to understand our privilege and what we can do to gain momentum with, especially as a white person, to work for good. Is there anything that comes to your mind in this moment? I'm putting you on the spot.
No. Uh, uh, to me, the key is, if you're a privileged person, but be compassionate with yourself. It's okay. I mean, you came into this world born with that skin. So be gentle with yourself. So we do, in our work, we do a lot of self-talk, talking to ourselves. Be gentle with your feelings, whatever they are, guilt, sadness, be with that. And then connect with the other, with the African-American or the brown person, and be willing to be vulnerable about sharing. And I think by doing that inner work of being compassionate with oneself, being compassionate with one's difficult feelings, and then connecting with the other who is different, and then being vulnerable about sharing our stories, is going to bring about the deepest healing for both of us. I, as a brown man or a black person, I have my own biases. I have to face them also. I have to do that with gentleness, with compassion. And then as I talk to a white person or to a policeman, I want to be vulnerable, and I would like that person, in the light of my vulnerability, I feel I have a great chance of the other person opening up to me also, because I have become vulnerable. But without this interaction, without this inner work simultaneously, we'll not be able to solve this at a core level. Yes, legislation will help critically. Education is critical. But this inner work and this outer work of connecting on a human level with the other, where we can be vulnerable, to me, those are the keys. And that's what I feel my work is.
Mm-hmm.
That inner work and that connecting with the other on a human level.
Mm-hmm.
It's my bias.
Is there a poem that you would like to share? You've quoted a few different times. Is there anything a little longer that you would like to share with us?
This is the very popular one I love very much, that about really any difficult feelings you have, don't see that as being something terrible. Embrace that. Hold that with love and compassion. And if you do, that becomes healed, integrated, and transformed. So I love that verse by Rumi who says, the dark thought, the shame, the malice, greet them at the door laughing, because each one has been sent as a guide from beyond. Embrace that with compassion, with love. And then what is our work? Our work is really to please come out of the circle of time and enter the circle of love. And this is about taking care of our ego. I love that one I just quoted, marry your soul. That wedding is the way. It's about opening up your heart. A soft way is saying, Jamal, please open the window of your heart. The moon will kiss you only through the window. That's a soft way of saying it, but it's a hard work. It's about really embracing difficult feelings. It's about meeting the other who is difficult. So Rumi has another verse about opening up the heart. He says, take a pickaxe and break open your stony heart. Take a pickaxe and break open your stony heart. The heart's matrix is glutted with rubies. Springs of laughter are buried in your chest. And yes, connect with the other. And Rumi says, oh God, you have created this I, you, we, they, to play the game of adoration with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I could go on and on, but
Thank you.
I think I put a bit of stop to that. Yeah. But I do want to say, for the inner work, there's another poetry I love very much by Mirza Ghalib, who is a Sufi from South Asia, who says, Jamal, the biggest problem you've had in your life is that your face was unclean, but you were obsessed with cleaning and cleaning and cleaning that mirror. I find that to be very instructive.
Oh, that's good. Jen, are you there? We might have some technical difficulties.
Okay. Well, let me in the meantime tell you one more quote which I love. The need to create community. It's critical we create community. I love Rumi's utterance. He says about the beauty of community, a wall standing alone is useless. Add to it other walls, it can support a roof, even a granary. Only when ink joins with a pen can the blank paper say something. Yes, that spiritual companionship of friends is critical.
Mm. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much. I'm checking the time and thinking, do we have 8 more hours?
Well, it's been fun. Thank you.
We could have a lot of fun. Yeah. Well, Jan has texted and said there's some internet issues. So I want to ask one final question, which is how can we engage with you and your work, and where can we find out what you're doing currently and connect with you in future ways?
Yes. Well, I have I have a website. The place that I co-founded with other colleagues called Interfaith Community Sanctuary also has a website. I work with the Interfaith Amigos, interfaithamigos.com also has a website. So we all have websites, and we can connect via websites and webinars and classes and programs like this.
Great. Well, we are so very grateful for this time and the great love and compassion that you bring to your work and in spiritual companionship and in interfaith dialogue and reconciliation. So we hope to continue to be in touch, and if there's any other final word or quote, you may share that. That would be lovely.
No, I think I'll end with the same one I repeated, which is critical for me. Please come out of the circle of time and enter the circle of love. I think that's critical.
Okay. We'll take those words and hold them deeply. Thank you so much, Brother Jamal.
Thank you so much for your gracious invitation and for your very generous words. Thank you.
All right.